Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first apologetics presentation for the fall 2025. Welcome to those who are here in person and those who are watching online. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dennis Kinman. Dennis has a background in Christian ministry and is a master's degree, right? And he is taking even more classes to pursue more education in ministry. And Dennis attends The Way, which is our sister campus to St. Luke's, and he has a heart for apologetics. He has a heart for teaching and a heart for this kind of information. We've met several times over lunch and enjoyed sharing apologetics with each other and discussing it. And little did he know I was interviewing him. No, we got to talking, and I thought, you know what, I think you would do a wonderful job to give a presentation. And so we have the rest of the fall semester planned out. We have, obviously, a presentation this month, which is September. Then we have one in October, one in November, and we have also one in December. If you go to stlukeslubbock.org and look for Ambassadors Apologetics, you can find the schedule on there. We always target Tuesday evenings. I forget the dates of the presentations, but it's always at 7 o'clock. Goes about 45 minutes or so with a question and answer session afterwards. So as you're hearing Dennis give his talk tonight, and you think about questions, just remember he'll be happy to answer your questions afterwards. Always, we don't know everything, and you may come up with one of the best questions, and that's what we're supposed to do, is use our minds.
Absolutely.
And to ask very good questions. Well, Dennis, I will let you continue. And Dennis's topic tonight is apologetics, a complement to faith, not a competitor. God calls us to engage our whole being in our spiritual journey, our heart as well as our mind. So using our mind to be prepared to give an answer is what we're called to do. And for those of you who may be tuning in for the first time and you're wondering, what is apologetics? It comes from a Greek word in the Bible, apologia. And apologia means to give a defense or give an answer. And in 1 Peter 3:15, the Apostle Peter tells us to be ready to give an answer for those who have questions about the hope we have within us. In other words, to give a defense or to give an answer, a good reason for believing things. It's all every Christian's duty to have some kind of answer, and to have an answer that grows in complexity and sophistication as we go along our journey. So, Dennis, I will give the platform over to you, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate it. And thanks for that awesome introduction. I can take about 2 slides out now with the definition and the why we do it. But no, I appreciate you being here, those of you that are here in person as well as those that are joining us online. I know with the beginning of school and everything that's going on right now, taking time off to attend something like this is sometimes a bit of a sacrifice, and I do appreciate it. So why am I here? Less of a philosophical thing, but more why me? Why did Andy ask me to be here and do this? I grew up in the church, the usual stuff, right? From little kid all the way up through youth group, made some of the best friends of my life in that youth group. And a lot of us are still friends today. We can call each other and pick up right where we left off. And I remember being young-ish, I think my age probably ended in teen something, and always hearing about this narrow road and this wide road, and that the narrow road that led to salvation and heaven and God was very narrow, and there weren't many people on it. But the wide road that leads to very bad things was just jam-packed like a superhighway. And as a kid growing up here in West Texas, that didn't compute with me, because I looked around. This was in the 70s and 80s, and everybody went to church. It was what you did. You didn't ask, do you go to church? You asked where you went to church. So that didn't really sink into me. Well, let's fast forward just a few years, about 18 years old, hadn't been 18 very long. I joined the military and I went out into the world, went to boot camp, went to a couple of schools, ended up stationed on the West Coast, and I was like, aha, okay, here's those wide road people. It was a culture shock for me outside of my little enclave, if you will, in West Texas, and going to the East Coast, to the West Coast, all over America, and seeing that you do have to ask the question, do you go to church? It's not assumed. And I'm not saying that everybody that I met was on the wide road to destruction, but my worldview changed. Now, I would like to say that I continued following all of the teachings and the lessons that I had learned those first 18 years from my parents, who I have to thank, they gave me a rock-solid foundation in faith, and I hope they're watching tonight. If they're not, I hope they see the recording at some point, because the reason I'm standing here today started with them. And the lessons I learned from the church, from my youth group teachers, Sunday school teachers, pastors, all of that stuff. I'd like to say that I walked the straight and narrow. I stayed on that narrow path. But you're not supposed to lie. I did my share of wandering off, a little bit of prodigal son action there, if you will. And eventually I came back, went to college, got married, and that put us back in church because that was what you did here. You got married, you had kids, you were active in your church, and you lived the good Christian life. Now, I'm not saying that we didn't do that. We did. We were extremely active, and it was not a surface level thing. We were definitely deeply involved. But as you know, as life goes on and life happens to you, you start asking questions. You start asking the why. And the why oftentimes leads to how, as in, how do I know? Even to this day, sometimes I will wake up at 3:15 in the morning. Why it's 3:15 all the time, I don't know. It's weird, but there it is. And that's when all the dark stuff that's been stacking up during the day that maybe I've shoved back, that's when it all comes out. And you start asking those what ifs. What if everything that I've been taught is wrong? I just believed it. What if Jesus wasn't who he said he was? What if he didn't even exist? Oh my gosh, what if there's no God? What if all those people, those smart people with all the letters after their names, what if they're right? And all of this that I've learned and that I've devoted my life to, or that I've said that I follow, is all wrong. And those things nagged at me. And I remember they would nag at me when I was a kid some, and I would go and I would ask a Sunday school teacher or I would ask a pastor, well, how do we know? How do we know God exists? How do we know that Jesus... Well, you just have to have faith. Cool. I'm glad that works for you. And there are people for whom that works beautifully. They accept things on faith, and it is unshakable. I'm envious of those people. Okay, we're not supposed to be envious. I aspire to have that level of faith in my own life one day, but that's what drew me towards apologetics. I had no idea. I didn't know it was a thing. If you'd have said the word to me, I don't know what that means. But I stumbled across a book just almost by accident, and I wish I could tell you which one it was, but I don't remember. And I read it, and I was like, okay, this guy's onto something. I mean, he's not just telling me, oh, you need to have faith. No, he's going, I get your questions. I had those same questions. I had those same doubts. So I went and I looked, and these are the things that I found, and my eyes were just open, and I'm like, where was this 15, 20 years ago? How many sleepless nights could I have avoided if I'd have had this to look at then? And then, got to feeling guilty. I was like, God, am I questioning you? Who am I to say I need to see evidence? But then I was like, but I have to. one of the things that I see a lot is this. It says, God is never going to enter through your head. The door he uses is your heart. First of all, that's pretty bold to say that God is never going to do something. Tell God he's never going to do something. God's going to be never and like he never before. You cannot restrict him. But that just negates the questions of 30%, 40%, 50% of the Christians out there today, and completely alienates, most likely, the majority of non-believers. While this is well-meaning, and I'm sure what they mean is that God will not stop at your head. You can't stop him at your head. An intellectual knowledge of God is not enough. You have to know God. I feel like that's what they're trying to say, but it fails miserably for those that are seeking more clarification, more intelligence, more evidence, or those that are just beginning their search. Is there even anything to this? If they see something like that, they're done. When I was growing up, we spent a lot of time, my brother and I, my parents came from Baylor County and Knox County. You may or may not know where those are. Mundy and Seymour, that may not help, I don't know. A couple of little dots, and some of my most treasured, precious memories are from those two little towns and some of the little dirt roads that my brother and I used to run up and down with our cousins and stuff. Coincidentally enough, those towns, specifically Seymour, are directly on the route to Fort Worth. Got some family there. But Abilene is also on the way to Fort Worth if you take a little different way. Let's say that I'm going out there, as I intend to do in a few weeks, to see the family that I have out there. And I decide, I think I'm going to take the nostalgic route. I think I'm going to take the route, and I'm going to go through Mundy and come up 22 or whatever it is, and then hit Seymour, maybe stop at the Allsups, get a fried burrito, and not tell anybody that I'm eating fried burritos, and then go through Wichita Falls and get to Fort Worth. Well, I get to the door of my relative's house, and I'm like, hey, it's so good to see you. Hey, what road did you take to get here? Oh, well, I went through Seymour. Get out. You're supposed to go through Abilene. The only way you can get here is through Abilene. No, they're not going to do that, because the destination, Fort Worth, the reason I'm going there to be with my family is what's important. How I got there is far less so. There are some people for whom God enters into their heart directly. In their head, it catches up at some point, or maybe it doesn't, because they have such a strong, heartfelt faith. There's others that need it to kind of come through an intellectual and a reasonable and a logical pathway, and then you make a conscious decision. And there's nothing wrong with that. Let's look and see what God himself thinks about it. In the book of Isaiah, come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they'll be as white as snow. Though they're red like crimson, they shall become like wool. If you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. Now, there's some verses that come before this. God had been chastising his people because they'd been doing bad things, worshiping idols and committing all kinds of sins and all this stuff. And as God is prone to do, he's like, enough, stop. You need to stop doing these bad things. Cleanse yourself so that we can enjoy our relationship together again. He's using reason. That's what we would do with our children. They're misbehaving. Hey, you need to stop misbehaving, or we're not going to go to the park. Or we're not going to have that birthday party, or whatever. You're doing wrong. I need you to do right because of this. That is a very simple, elementary, logical path. And besides the word willing, what is willing if not an act of the mind, a conscious decision that is being made? Your heart is not willing. Your mind is what is willing to do something. For Acts, Paul went in, as was his custom, on 37th day. He reasoned with them, the Greeks, from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and rise from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ. Paul was in Greece, Thessalonica, Berea, or there's a third town, I can't remember what it was. But he was in Greece, and the Greeks prized their logic and reason. Some of their philosophers thought in lines very similar to some of our ancient scriptures, and well, that's another topic altogether, but they had a lot of respect for the logic and reason. Emotion didn't carry as much weight with them. So Paul was using their own language, if you will, not against them, but as a tool to convince them. If I go to, I don't know where I would go, if I go to France, and I'm trying to speak to the French, and I'm not speaking French, I'm not going to get very far. I need to speak their language. Paul needed to speak their language. He already spoke Greek, that wasn't the issue, but he needed to speak their intellectual language. And he did, and we know the results of that were a great many people came to faith. Now Jesus himself, one of them, this crowd that he was speaking to that was getting a little riled up, as they tended to do, they asked him, Jesus, a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. If I remember correctly, and I may not, I believe in Deuteronomy where that first was mentioned to us, says you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength, but the word mind didn't come in. Jesus made it a specific point to but to make a clear distinction between the heart and the mind. He wants them both. And if that's the greatest commandment, I think he meant what he said. And then the verse that Andy quoted to us before we started here, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. And I always have to include this point. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. Sometimes that's the part that is missed. And we come off a little judgmental and harsh sometimes. So if you find yourself in a conversation where you're doing apologetics, remember that last clause, please. Do it with gentleness and respect. Okay, there's some famous Christian apologists. Some of these I've read. They took the head route. Lee Strobel, you may have heard from him. He wrote The Case for Christ, The Case for Heaven, The Case for a Creator, The Case for God, The Case for pretty much everything. I've read about half of his stuff. The guy is good. But he started out as a journalist in Chicago. He was an investigative journalist, and his wife had become a Christian. She was not when they got married, and this irritated Lee. And so he set out to disprove her, to prove her wrong. I don't know what that says about their marriage, but that's the way it went. He set out to prove her wrong. He's like, I'm going to go talk to all these people, and I'm going to find out, and I'm going to prove that this is wrong, that this cannot be. And if you've read his book, you know the outcome. By the end of it, he was on his knees, a professing Christian. He did not set out to do that. He set out to do exactly the opposite. Josh McDowell, when he was a teenager, he was agnostic, is the way I understand it. And at some point, somewhere in his life, one of his very, very good friends who was a Christian, he challenged him. He's like, okay, the resurrection, that's ridiculous. Nobody has ever died and come back to life. Prove it. And his friend did. And the rest, as they say, is history. I'm sure there was more to it than that, but that Christian friend said, okay, yeah, I'll take that bet. And he won. And now we have the guy that wrote Evidence That Demands a Verdict and a few more that are some of the really, really good guides to apologetics. They're not, fireside reading. They are reference books, but they're very, very good. And I understand now his son Sean has picked up the torch and is doing it as well. So, sir? Yeah. This one I learned about recently. A fellow named Pedro Garcia. He was Spanish, And he was a nominal Catholic, elapsed, and then eventually just turned atheist because he had the problem. He grew up in the Catholic Church, and he would ask the questions, much like what I talked about earlier, and wasn't satisfied with the answers that he got, because they were very typically, you don't need to be asking these questions. Why are you questioning God? You just need to have faith and listen to us. Man, you're a teenager? How's those answers going to work for you? Not very well. He decided to go the atheist route. What changed him is he met a girl. He was in the United States. He was a gifted saxophone player, and I believe he was here on some kind of a scholarship to play for a semester or two. And he met a young lady and was smitten, and she was a Christian, but she would talk to him in a way that he had never been talked to about the faith before. She did it with what? Gentleness and respect, and also with intelligence. Now, she had some help. Her parents were devout Christians, and I want to say that her dad was a minister or a professor, very, very schooled. And he would talk to him, lots of conversations with her and her parents, and found that the Christians were not the mindless drones, the unintelligent followers, the unintelligent sheep, even though we use that word differently, he did not, that you could have a tremendous intellect and still be a Christian. In fact, the smarter you are, the more likely you're going to be, is the conclusion that he came to. And he is now an apologist as well. I don't have any of his writings, but I understand that he has done some, and he does do some speaking. A few more that I like. J. Warner Wallace, I like this guy. He's an LAPD detective, atheist. He took a cold case approach to Christianity. He wanted to, specifically the resurrection in the Gospels, he wanted to know, using cold case techniques that the police department would use. He did a full-on forensic investigation into this, and much like Lee Strobel at the end of it, he came away convinced and converted. And he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. It's a good one. It doesn't cover the entire breadth of apologetics, although very few books do, because it is an enormous subject. But the areas that he does treat, he does so very well, and from kind of a unique perspective that I really liked. We've got C.S. Lewis. We know him, right? Now, to be fair, Mr. Lewis was already reading some Christian books, some theology. He was an agnostic, but he was trying to do his due diligence, and he was exploring it. And he was kind of like, okay, you know, there may be something to this. And he had a couple of real good friends. One of them, Mr. Tolkien of Lord of the Rings fame, sat him down one day and had a good long conversation with him when he was ready. And they convinced him more or less to go ahead and take the leap head first. And he did. And he too was converted. He too was saved. And then wrote a little book called Mere Christianity, along with 100 other books, all of which are really, really good. Frank Morrison, he set out to disprove the resurrection, kind of like Mr. Wallace did. Ended up a Christian, wrote a book, Who Moved the Stone? A Skeptic Looks at the Death and Resurrection of Christ. We could probably find dozens, if not even hundreds more, people with stories just like that. What do most of them have in common? The people in their lives. Most of them, I'm not 100% sure about Morrison, and I don't think Wallace did, but everybody else had somebody in their lives that was a person of faith that pulled them along, either introduced the topic to them and then helped them along, or they were already seeking and they pulled them and helped them along and taught them and helped them and edified them and strengthened them and prayed for them and gave them information. We are indispensable in the work of the kingdom. We don't have to be a C.S. Lewis. We don't have to be a J. Warner Wallace. We don't have to be a Lee Strobel. We can be a Dennis, an Andy, a Sam, a Gary, and still do the work that needs to be done with the people that come into our lives. I'm sorry, I've been debating on this one all day. I'm going to go ahead, and if a question comes up for it later, cool, we'll answer it then. A lot of times the greatest opportunities for evangelism, if you want to call it that, or apologetics, unfortunately, it comes out of great tragedies. I know we're all thinking of last week. Quite honestly, that's what prompted that. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought there's so many others, the natural disasters, you don't need me to tell you the kinds of tragedies that we face anymore almost daily. And when you look at it, especially if you're on social media, and heaven help you if you go to the comments section, it's a cesspool. It's awful. But you find a few people in there that you can tell are hurting, that have been hurt, and maybe they just need somebody to kind of reach out to them. And it's so easy for us to get angry, to retaliate. Well, they hate me, so I'm going to hate them back even harder. I've got a book around here somewhere that I think tells us to do something different. Yeah, there it is. But we're humans, and that's hard. It's hard not to do that. But we have to remember, as tragic and as broken and as sick as this world is, it makes our job that much more important. Think about Abraham. You may remember this. When he was journeying, he was doing his thing, and he met with the Lord, and the Lord said, I think that them two towns down there, that Sodom and Gomorrah, I think I'm done with them. I'm going to completely destroy them. And Abraham was like, well, what if there's a few people there that are good? I mean, best we can tell, Sodom probably had a population of thousands. Nobody's really done a whole lot of research, but that seems to be the general consensus. Let's say 7,000. I don't know. And Abraham said, well, if you find 50 people there that are righteous, will you not destroy it? And the Lord said, okay. If you find 50 people there that are righteous, I will not destroy it. And Abraham was like, well, maybe I've heard some things about that town too. What if you only found 40? God said, if I only found 40, I'll leave them alone. What if you only found 20? If there's 20, I will spare the city. God, what if there's only 10? Only 10 out of, what do we say, 7,000? For the sake of 10, I will not destroy the city. Every single soul is precious to God. I don't know what would have happened if he had continued that line of questioning. Well, God, what if there's only 2 or 3? God may have said, well, you know what, if there's only 2 or 3, you go get them and drag them out of there because I'm going to do the rest of the city in. I don't know. I also think, sometimes I read that and I think I could see God kind of chuckling, okay, if there's only 10 or 20, yeah, whatever. But then I thought about it last night and I can't help but wonder when God was responding, if he wasn't responding with patience, but with sadness, because he knew there were not so many as 10 righteous people in that town. I don't know, that's speculation. But everyone, when we react to a tragedy, last week, hurricanes, earthquake, shootings, all the horrible things, we're setting an example. Eventually, somebody in this room or online, or somebody in this room or online knows, I feel like there's probably at least a 50% chance that at some point they're going to come to you with a question, or somebody will come to them with a question. Why are y'all the way you are? There's this horrible tragedy, and you're out here with candles, and you're singing songs, and you're praising God, and you're praying. Why? Hopefully not in a confrontational manner, but genuinely asking a question. Because I'm sure from the outside that looks utterly insane. Completely unreasonable. Why? Why do you do this? And you say, because we have hope. What kind of hope do you have? Apologetics is now in play. You don't have to be a master of it. Andy is the smartest guy in apologetics that I think I've ever met in person. I'm over here at kind of the remedial kindergarten level. You don't have to be as smart as him to say a few things, but you need to know a few things. You need to have some kind of a foundation. Like Peter said, be ready to give a defense for the hope that you have in you. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is to do a little bit of learning and be able to articulate these things. It takes practice. I haven't had much of an opportunity to do it myself. I'm learning it. I don't know what would happen if somebody walked in here right now and asked me a difficult question that I couldn't answer. For all I know, one of you is going to ask me a difficult question that I can't answer. We'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But you need to be ready to give some kind of an answer. And it doesn't have to be great, lofty, theological talk. In fact, that's probably going to drive them away. But you do have to meet them where they're at. If they're like, where is God when this hurricane hit and wiped out all my family? You don't want to say, well, the cosmological argument for God says that it was highly improbable. And no, you need to meet them where they're at. Hey, man, God's heart is breaking too. But we do not grieve as those who have no hope, because we have hope because of Jesus, because of the resurrection. It's a segue into something. And you may not get anywhere, but you're planting a seed. You know how many people, and this may be controversial, you know how many people Billy Graham converted? 0. Billy Graham spoke the truth and got out of the way and let the Holy Spirit do the work. That's one of the most valuable pieces of advice I ever got from a mentor at a previous church that I was at 25 years ago. I was getting my advanced lay speaker certification, and I was asking him, Dan, I don't know about this, I don't know about that, the weight of the responsibility. And he's like, you're never going to convert anybody. That's the Holy Spirit's job. Your job is to lead them to Him. Tell the truth, speak the truth, and let the Holy Spirit do the work. That takes a lot of the pressure off. I'm not an evangelist, at least I don't think I am. I don't feel like I'm called to be one. So I'm kind of uncomfortable when I get those questions. But instead of falling back on evangelism and throwing out some Billy Graham, type statements or whatever, I can go to what I know a little bit about, and that's apologetics, heavily interspersed with Scripture as appropriate for whoever I'm talking to. So, for example, let's look at creation. This is just a little introduction. This is my approach to the argument for the existence of God. There's other arguments, some of which I struggle to understand, especially enough to articulate it. But this one, my little science nerdy mind, works just fine for me. Is the creation just a happy accident, or was it something else? The cosmologic design, or the Kamal theory of design for the universe, it relies on 3 points of logic. If A is true and B is true, then C has to be true, within reason. Point A, designs have a designer. This suit jacket didn't just materialize out of nowhere. A whole bunch of cotton and wool fabric things did not just get together one day and have a party, a linen party or whatever, weave themselves into a jacket that just so happened to fit me quite well. No, somebody somewhere in New York or Walmart or wherever designed this jacket and sent it out, and it was made, and I bought it. This is the product of somebody's mind and intention. So designs have a designer. The universe has a design. We see that in Psalm 19. The heavens and earth declare the glory of God. Paul says it in Romans 1, basically echoing that same sentiment, saying, so those that do not know God or do not know Jesus have no excuse because the evidence is everywhere. So the universe has a design. Therefore, the universe has a designer. A plus B equals C. Or to look at it another way, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Again, my jacket, this computer, your shoes. At some point, they did not exist. And then they began to exist, and now they do exist. There had to be a cause. Like I say, they didn't just weave themselves together, or, snowmen weren't assembled out of just random snowflakes. No, they have a cause. Somebody did that. The universe began to exist. We know with essentially 100% certainty that this is true. The physics and the theories that explain it, I'm not smart enough to understand, but I've read a whole lot of people that have a whole lot of letters after their name that do understand it, and they're all singing the same song, so there's probably something to it. The universe did, in fact, begin to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, we're starting at the most fundamental level here. If somebody came up to you and said, I don't believe that there is a God, this is a great starting point. Let's start with, and I'm not talking about the God of the Scriptures. I'm not talking about the Hebrew God. I'm not talking about Yahweh. I'm talking about a creator of any stripe, whatever you want to call him, a little g God, a creator. You get to this point, and then you can start moving into, okay, and now that we've established there is a God, let me show you why it's the God, and then you continue on as far as that person will let you take them. So let's look at some odds for a minute. I'm not a gambler. I can't win a coin toss. I think I might have spent $10 on a lottery ticket ever in my life, all total, and have nothing to show for that. But the odds of winning the Powerball lottery, when I calculated this for a class over at the Way, it was back in, May. My parents' anniversary, oddly enough. To win the jackpot, which would be 5 white balls plus a Powerball, your chance is 1 in 292,201,338. I'm going to keep my dollar. Let's say, I'll be happy with $1 million. Just $1 million, that's all I want. 1 chance in 11,688,054. Well, Dennis, I'm not a greedy guy. I just kind of like to repair some things around the house, maybe fix up my car. I'll take $50,000. Well, your chances of getting that are 1 in 913,129. You might want to go see about getting a loan or something instead. Your odds are better. Well, just take $100. I'll go buy some groceries. 1 in 14,494. Okay, am I even going to get my money back? Am I going to get anything out of this? Can I even get $4? Yeah, you got a 1 in 38% chance. Now, if I called you before you left the house this evening, and I said, before you leave, I want to tell you, you've only got a 1 in 38 chance of making it to this church alive tonight, would you have left? I would have stayed home and watched it online. So remember these odds. We're going to talk about something called the cosmological constant. This is something I'm going to tell you right up front, I do not even pretend to understand. Chemistry, I kind of get. Microbiology, I get. Physics, no. My biggest experience with physics and everything I know about physics begins and ends with the Big Bang Theory on TV. But there was a guy, Dr. Michael Guillen, I think is how you say his name. He was a physics instructor at Harvard for many years, and he made the discovery, if you will, that science proves God, not disproves him. Now, as you can imagine, this did not make him popular in the academic community, especially among scientists. So that made his career kind of take a little bit of a different turn. But one of the things that he writes about in a book called Believing is Seeing, and I highly recommend this book if your mind kind of works along these lines, there's something called the cosmological constant, and it's symbolized by the Greek letter lambda. This tells us basically how fast the universe is expanding from its beginning, from its central point. kind of like a giant inflating balloon of space and time. And it tells us how fast that's going. And it also tells us a lot about the age of the universe. And most importantly for tonight, whether or not life is possible in the universe. That's the one we want to know about. Is life possible in the universe? This cosmological constant is what is part of the formula, if you will, that helps us determine that. The chance of lambda, the cosmological constant, having precisely the value necessary for life, which it does, obviously, we're here, is 1 in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times I repeated the word trillion. All of a sudden, the lottery doesn't look so bad as an investment. Let's put this into other terms. Again, math is not my thing, but here we are. 10 squared, 10 to the 2 is 100. 10 cubed with 3 is 1,000. 10 to the 6th is 1,000,000. That value right there with all the trillions in it is one chance in 10 to the 120th. Those are incalculable odds. That is the chance that life would randomly appear in the universe as it is now. This goes into sort of the fine-tuning idea of creation, that if the earth were tilted just a little bit more this way, or if its rotation was just a little bit less, life wouldn't be possible. If it was just a little bit closer to the sun over here or a little bit further away, no, there's no life. If the moon was not exactly where it was, if the other planets in our solar system were not exactly where they were, life would very likely not be possible on the planet Earth. Everything in creation, the entire universe, we look at those pictures from the Hubble space, all of that is by design, so that we have life on this planet. Now, you could ask, is there life on other planets? I don't know. I'm not going there. I've got enough problems just living on this one without thinking about another one. If there is, God would have mentioned it in the Bible. I don't think he wants us worrying about such things. Let's worry about this one that we have right now. When we get this one right, maybe we can start worrying about some of those other ones. So that's just a tiny nugget, just an intro to kind of show you what one aspect of apologetics might look like from one particular theory. There's dozens and dozens of different approaches, different theories, different disciplines, but they all come to the same end conclusion. There is a God. We read about him in the Bible. He did become incarnate. He did die. He did rise again. There is more than enough ample evidence for those things to stand up in a court of law any day, anywhere. Our faith is very well placed indeed. And the more you learn about apologetics, the more if you choose to go any further with it, the more you're going to discover and be comfortable with some of these facts as well. So to kind of wrap up a little bit, the apologetics, things that it can do for us, it can confirm and strengthen our own faith. That's what it did for me. That's what got me into it. It's like, okay, Mark chapter 9 has kind of been be the subtitle of my autobiography. Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. In other words, I believe, but I want that surety. I want that extra percentage of belief. Non-believers, a lot of times what is blocking them from considering the faith is what they perceive to be intellectual arguments or stumbling blocks. Sometimes that comes across as derision or, the flying spaghetti monster, sky daddy, and other derisive terms. But that's what it comes down to. They don't believe that it can stand up to an intellectual debate. There's a lot of debates out there. William Lane Craig, who I don't even know if I could sit in an audience with him speaking and understand. He's extremely, extremely brilliant. Has pretty soundly defeated every intellectual atheist I believe he's ever debated. And these are fairly scored debates. It's not, the church deciding who won or lost. They're scoring points. And he wins, as far as I know, virtually every single time. So intellectual barriers or challenges are not. They just have to be overcome, and they can be. So that we can show the entire world that Christianity is not just wishful thinking, fanciful fantasy, but it's a truly rational and defensive worldview that has merit and that also will transform your life. Questions? We said we were going to have a Q&A, and I told Andy earlier, I just hope I have enough A's for the Q's. I don't know, but if I don't know, I promise you I will say I don't know.
Well, I'm standing the spot. Hopefully the graphic is not covering me online. But everybody, this is your chance to ask some questions, and Dennis will provide you an answer. He'll either say, I don't know, or something else. And I don't know is a perfectly good answer.
Yes.
So I'm going to go back to the computer and see if there are some questions, but I'll give this mic to all of you and see if you all have questions here. I guess I can, go ahead, Sam. Go ahead and start.
Well, one of the ones that some of the atheists or something would go, well, life happened, so there it is. So forget those 10 to 120. It happened, so there we are, Any response?
Say that again?
Did I turn that on?
The switch should be up.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Some people, naysayers, will say, well, life exists. It's happened. Here we are. So that dispels the chances, remote chances of it happening, because here we are.
Okay. The spontaneous life theory that something came from nothing. In Latin, I think it's called ex nihilo, something created from nothing. We can't do that. We have to have some matter, something to start with to create anything. We don't have the ability to pull a squirrel out of a vacuum. I would say out of thin air, but air has, nitrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide and all those things. But if I put my hand into a vacuum that was completely gasless, I'm probably not going to be able to pull out a squirrel. I can't make something from nothing. If something truly came from nothing, which it had to have, then something had to create that. The Big Bang Theory, for example, it said, one time the universe was this little tiny, super compressed little ball of matter, and it exploded. Where'd that little tiny ball of matter come from? What made it explode? Was it just always there? No, something does not come from nothing. The idea of spontaneous life generation. We have some of the most brilliant scientists that have ever walked the planet alive right now, and they cannot make life come from nothing. Well, what about evolution? What about it? See if I get my prefixes right here. Intraspecies evolution is a thing. That's adaptation. Somewhere, in my history, I adapted to the point where I no longer need hair, let's just say. Or, polar bears, they adapted. Those that had white fur lived. Those that had brown fur and couldn't hide in the snow or the icebergs or whatever did not live, and so on and so forth. But a snake growing legs and turning into a lizard, crawling up on land and turning into a monkey, and then turning into a human does not happen. DNA does not work that way. We've tried. There was a Soviet experiment where it was awful, where they tried to mingle the DNA of apes and men to create super soldiers. I would say read about it. I would actually say don't. It'll turn your stomach. Let's just say it was a miserable failure. That's not how evolution works. Do we look and there's similarities between us and apes? Sure. The DNA is, let's just say 90% similar. Okay. I think it's like 85% similar to a grasshopper. So what? Does that mean we came from grasshoppers? No. Margarine. If anybody eats margarine, margarine is supposedly only one molecule away from being PVC, that stuff they plumb your kitchen with. But is margarine PVC? No. Sometimes that 1% difference is enough. The spontaneous generation of life has yet to ever be proven, and I don't look for it to be proven ever.
I have a question, and you may have said this. I've been busy doing the electronics here. Was there one particular argument that impressed you, and did it happen to be the kalam that you talked about tonight?
I wanted to start from somewhere, and that was really ended up being the serious starting point. The first book that I read that dealt with apologetics as such, I could be wrong, but I want to say that it was Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ. I'm not sure, but I was like, okay, that's great. He made a good case. But that case was dependent on the existence of God. And hopefully he forgives me, but that's how my mind works. It's like, okay, this is a good case, but it's hinging on this fact. Can I verify this fact? So that got me working backwards until finally I got to that argument, the Kalam cosmological argument, about creation, something coming from nothing. No, it had to be created. And some of these technical science things that I didn't fully understand, but I did, that was able to convince me, okay, yes, this universe had to be created by something. The next logical step was, is that something the God of the Bible? Is that true? Okay, now we can go into the life of Jesus and everything that surrounds that. That's the logical progression for me. It may not be that way for everybody. Everybody's going to arrive at the destination possibly by a slightly different path. There's not a right one, there's not a wrong one, there's just the one that gets you where you need to be with God.
So what you just said was, you show there's good reasons to believe God exists, and then once you have a theistic God, then you either have Christianity or Judaism or Islam, and then you look at those religions closely.
Yeah.
And you went to the life of Jesus, basically. Okay.
I did. I did a little tiny bit of study in comparative religions, just because I wondered. At one point, many years ago, I wondered, well, could God have sent another? The Muslims talk about Muhammad being the last prophet of God. And I'm like, I can't just reject that out of hand. I need to know if that's true or not, because if it is true, I've been doing things wrong for a lot of years. So I gave it some diligence and I looked it up, and it didn't take me very long to come to the conclusion that no, that is not true. This is true, because not because it's what I want to hear. Anybody that reads the Gospels, if I just follow Jesus, I'm going to have a happy life full of prosperity. No, that's not how it goes. So it's not that this one's telling me what I want to hear, it's that there is evidence for this one that is far stronger than anything that this one over here could provide. Do I believe Judaism is true? Absolutely. I believe that Christianity is not set against Judaism. It is the fulfillment of Judaism. So the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is our God as well.
Well, do we have any other questions at all? I don't see any questions online. They must be still just processing everything you said this evening. So
if they have any, I'll have them email you.
Okay, that's fine. If you have any questions online, feel free to email me.
Yeah.
Do you have any last thoughts you want to share to us before we end our evening?
If you decide to undertake a study of apologetics, I promise you it will be rewarding. And I don't want you, just like I said, I don't want you to ever feel like that it is in opposition to faith. It is not. At the end of the day, do you have to make a choice to believe or not believe? That takes a degree of faith? Yes. But you will have found more than ample evidence to give you the ability to make that decision with a lot of confidence. And so if this is something that you would like to follow up on, please do. If you're sort of new to it, I would recommend any of Lee Strobel's books. Just pick up one and start where you want. He talks to some very, very intelligent people, but they're very good at putting it into layman's terms that's easier for the rest of us to understand. After him, the Dr. Michael Goulian, Believing is Seeing. If you have particularly of a scientific mind, his would be a great one if you're looking to prove the existence of God. There's another one by Frank Turek and Norm Geisler. Now, Frank and I were acquaintances a long time ago, back in the late 80s, early 90s, but I doubt he remembers me, but I'm still going to plug his book anyway because it's magnificent. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist is the name of it. And it's an easy read, very well worth it. Eric Metaxas had one, I can't remember what it's called. Is Atheism Dead? I think is the name of it. It and the Frank Turek book are very, very similar. So if I had to start with anything, it'd be Lee Strobel or Frank Turek, Turek. Those would be my two top recommendations.
Well, let's give Dennis a round of applause. Dennis, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this evening. You spoke with clarity and really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Let's bow our heads. Dear God, we give you thanks for Dennis sharing his thoughts tonight. Help us to meditate on what he shared with us and help us be the kind of winsome ambassadors, gentle and respectful, prepared to give an answer to those who ask us the hope. And remember that we can always learn more. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, everybody, thank you for joining in. Our next presentation is in October. See you then.